Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last slideshow that we will have for syntax. This is called Syntax 3 for my organizational purposes. But first, how are you all doing? I miss your faces, to be totally honest. I miss a lot of faces right now. But hopefully these videos make sense and can help you work through the slides as you hear me talk about them in a way that's better and more effective than just reading the slides for yourself. Okay, so we have just a few things left that we didn't talk about with syntax. One really important thing is the concept of movement. So syntax is transformational. Elements in an underlying structure change word order. They move around in the template to derive a new sentence. Okay, again, I keep mentioning analogies with other grammatical components, but this is feeling a little bit like morphology again, where we can add layers of structure and in some cases rearrange things to get a new element, like compounding or something like that. Here, we're changing word order. We're moving constituents in some way in order to derive a new sentence from an old one. So let me just give you a simple example in English. The fronting of auxiliary verbs is a simple extraction or movement that takes place to get a question from a declarative statement. So that guy should go, right, is a simple statement. And if we want to make that into a question, we just take this auxiliary verb should and move it to the front of the sentence and turn it into a question. Should that guy go? Okay, so we've derived a new sentence, a question, out of an old one, a declarative statement. Same here, they will win the pie eating contest. If we need to generate a question from that content, our grammar in English allows us to just front that or move it to the front of the sentence, and we've transformed it so that we get a question. So those are very simple examples. English has some very hard, complicated examples that involve many steps. And we mentioned last time tag questions. So lots of languages have tags. Not a lot of languages have this wonky, complicated transformation that English has, which is called a tag question. A tag question is basically a kind of rhetorical question. You generally don't use them to truly seek information, but rather you're stating something that's maybe kind of obvious, or you're remarking on something. So if I'm looking at someone who is only taking the salty things off of the tray, maybe I would say, you don't like sweets, do you? I'm not actually asking a question, but this is a very natural, common part of English grammar and English speech. So all of us in this class have used tag questions at some point, and they sound very, very natural. But the underlying grammar is incredibly complex and can help reveal aspects of syntax that we aren't aware of. So when you have something like a modal change or a different auxiliary, or in this case, a command form, have a drink, won't you? Right? It kind of suggests that, like, deep down in the early stages of generating the sentence, there's a hidden will somewhere that rises to the surface when we use this content to make a tag question. Part of the complexity is changing the polarity or the negative positive of the verb. So if someone doesn't like sweets, the tag part of our tag question has to be positive. It's so weird, but languages are weird and unpredictable. So if we were to try to teach, say, a foreigner learning English, how how to make a tag question, how to break that down, there are many steps involved in the derivation, and you don't have to remember these steps. It's simply an illustration of how complex syntactic grammar can be, right? So if you start with something basic, like you don't like sweets, you don't, and you do a simple subtraction calculation to derive or generate the sentence that you end up with. Maybe you start with something called ellipsis, which is like just cutting out part of the content. So that brings us to you don't like sweets, you do. Then you have to take the don't and turn it into a positive, so a polarity change, we call that. Okay. And then you have to take this you and you do and sorry, you do and flip-flop the order, which is called subject-verb inversion. Again, you don't have to remember these steps, just appreciate how weird and complex this feature of English grammar is. So such examples help us understand concepts of deep structure versus surface structure. And this, too, is a really important aspect of syntactic research. So when we're calculating the kind of hidden rules of language, either for sheer knowledge or for applications like computer learning, algorithms that lead to speech recognition software, translation software, things like that, we need to understand how deep structure works in the language that we're working on. So deep structure is kind of posited as the underlying form that you use and you apply rules and steps to end up with this surface structure, which is observed. Okay. So importantly, surface structure is what we observe in actual utterances, so what people produce in their speech. Deep structure is a calculation posited by researchers, linguists, but also psychologists, other researchers, computer programmers. And these are theoretical constructs, so they're subject to some revision because sometimes we get more data and we realize that we maybe got it sort of wrong. Okay. But we're not meant, like many aspects of our grammar, we're not meant as speakers to be walking around consciously aware of the deep structure of everything that we say, right? The deep structure is hidden to us as speakers. It has to be, or we would never be able to belt out all the sentences that we can just spontaneously say in milliseconds without having to think about it. Okay, so deep structure, it's complicated. It's in our heads in a certain sense. We can observe it kind of indirectly, but we're not meant to be consciously aware of it. Thank goodness. Other aspects of movement, so do insertion is a funny one in English. So if we turn a declarative sentence into a question and it only has one verb, we don't have that nice option of fronting it like, say, most questions in Spanish. We can't say, liked the students the movie? We have to use this thing called do insertion. Did the students like the movie? And it has its own pretty complex grammar because the tense of the main verb, in this case like, kind of hops over to live with that do, which is kind of weird, right? But we're not meant to be consciously aware of that, unless you're a linguist, and then you go crazy. WH movement is also somewhat complex. It is how languages form information questions rather than just yes/no questions. So if I were to underline the direct object, the noun phrase here, Chinese and Greek, imagine like I didn't quite hear this content of the sentence and I wanted to make it into an information question. That too would have many steps between the deep structure of what I want to say and the surface structure that we end up with, which is something like this. Which languages can my teacher speak? Again, you can imagine many, many complicated steps that we sort of perform instantaneously or nearly in our brains. But what's going on is an inversion of an auxiliary and a noun, fronting of a WH expression, among other components of that transformation. Part of what makes learning a new language as an adult so challenging, I guess, or in some cases painful even, is that you have to actually think about changes that you don't have to think about in your native language. So everything has to slow down. Okay? So that concludes our presentation on syntax. At this stage, you'll have a pretty fun syntax homework, and then this same week, you will move on to midterm exam review, which is chapters 1 through 5 in our textbook. You have a guide to your midterm, which is due. You can take a picture of that and send it to me. And then we'll also have a way to put the midterm Jeopardy questions on Sakai. Thank you for your attention.